Hello. Pillage, plunder, vandalize, destroy, wreck, subvert, mutilate, defile, profane, debase, degrade, contaminate, corrupt, and desecrate. Those are words. I'm a set and costume designer, work with directors, conductors in opera productions, and those are words that have been literally used to describe our work. Which brings up a whole series of questions, which we start with, what is a work of art? And who does it belong to? Which is the question. Who owns it? The artist who creates it, the patron or the museum or the collector who owns it, has bought it and owns it, bringing up an interesting subdivision of that question, that now it has actually reached the courts that if a collector buys a painting from a young artist at a low rate, and as the time passes, the artist becomes more and more successful, the worth of the piece grows. Should the collector pay the artist part of that? Are they legally responsible? Are they ethically responsible to pay back part of the increased value? These are all extremely difficult and complicated questions. So as I said, I'm just going to present them as a series of questions. When it comes to performing arts, which is what I am connected with and what we're mainly concerned with today, again, who owns the work of art? The performer, the interpreter, and what does it mean to interpret a piece? There are canon interpretation, and some instrumentalists, particularly pianists and so on, say that an interpretation is a pane of glass, which is between the audience and the work. I feel that that is, say, an untenable position, actually, because there is no such thing as a kind of clear interpretation. Because the question just comes back, what is the work of art, actually? What is it? You think of a painting which has a more objective existence, say. It is a certain square footage of canvas, painted, covered with paint by a particular artist. Fine. But when it moves out of the artist's studio, it starts to pick up all sorts of other things that the paint artist may not have intended. It starts to have a title, which may or may not be given by the artist. What is the difference in looking at two Jackson Pollock paintings, which to a certain degree look very similar? One is called Composition Number 15, and one is called Full Fathom 5, changes the painting completely. Where did that title come from? And this is an actual example, is that it seems as though the title of Full Fathom 5, which is now forever attached to that Jackson Pollock, came from a dealer. So, again, it starts to sort of pick up. Then it moves into a museum. So the painting is hanging there. What about the title? What about the label? What about the picture frame? What about, is the painting hanging next to another painting? How does it relate to that painting? Does, in fact, if you have a Van Gogh self-portrait here and you have a Rembrandt self-portrait here, in some ways the fact that they're hanging together creates a work of art in between the two of them. So And if it's in a museum like the Metropolitan, if it's in a museum like the Morgan, if it's in a private house turned into a museum like the Frick, if it's in the artist's studio, the same painting keeps changing, keeps mutating as it picks up all of these various things floating around. Now, this is equally, if not more true of a play or an opera. What is the piece? Yes, it's text that's written down. It's a score that's written down. And how do artists, creators, composers and playwrights keep control of their piece? Now, say music is relatively objective. There are notes that have a certain amount of value. They are lined up in a way that is always played the same way, in the same order. There are tempo markings, even metronome markings. Beethoven put metronome markings into his pieces so that they would always be played at the tempo he wanted them, and they are almost completely ignored, always. Wagner filled his scores with notes, tempos. Parsifal, his final opera, which was, when it was first done at Bayreuth, it was first performed at Bayreuth, and since that first performance, all of the performances have been timed, starting with the first one through Furtwängler and Klemperer and Toscanini and so on. The piece, the variation in time is of this opera, which is about possibly sort of 3 hours long, is 1 hour difference, which means that the piece completely, even though it is completely codified, has changed totally in the amount of time that it occupies. Now, when you come to productions, again, mostly the text and the music remain inviolate. Mostly. The famous instance at Bayreuth, the home of Wagner, the theater devoted to Wagner, the place where Cosima Wagner, his widow, attempted to freeze Wagner completely as the master would have wanted it, unchanged, could change nothing about the staging, nothing about the design, nothing about the music. When Wieland Wagner, his grandson, who was a brilliant stage director, a brilliant theater person, was doing Götterdämmerung, he cut a whole section out of Götterdämmerung, and the critics were outraged. How dare this happen? How dare you mutilate? How dare you corrupt? How dare you misuse this? And Wieland said, first of all, it was my grandfather, so I can do anything I want to. And secondly, at this point in time, in my production, it doesn't work. We who start to work on productions have, and I almost think have to have, almost an arrogance and an ego. Because what you do when you do a production is you, as the designer, the designers and the director, conductor, singers and so on, is you seize this work and you make it yours. Sort of say to yourself, as Wieland did, and as I have done in productions, I am as good as the composer. At this moment, in this place, I am equal to the composer, and the two of us, or the group of us, are going to work together to do this production. Because this sounds like an outrageous statement, but I'll actually have a sort of proof to show that it isn't, is composers and playwrights don't know what they've done. They don't know what they've done. Because what makes them great is that there is this enormous subconscious territory. Now, this is, as I said, there's a nice story that shows this. A director and I and other designers were doing a piece by Dominic Argento, a living composer. And this was a piece called The Voyage of Edgar Allan Poe, and we were doing it in Gothenburg, Sweden. It had been done in the United States, and we, in our inevitable and kind of perhaps even understandable arrogance, said, the piece is written, all the stage directions deal with it, it all takes place on a ship, on a boat that's going between New York and Baltimore, on which Poe is and dies, and has this kind of a fantasy world. We said, you know, at that boat metaphor, I don't know, I think we should just throw that all out. We should maybe set it in a Victorian operating theater. And we did not check with Dominic whether this was okay. We did not get permission from Dominic to do this. What we sort of hoped was, because it was in Gothenburg, Sweden, he would never find out. He would never. So we proceeded to do this. Then at the dress rehearsal, someone came up and said, Mr. Argento is here at the rehearsal, and he's going to be watching. And we thought, oh, what do we do now? And then at the end of the rehearsal, the same person, the head of the opera company, said, Mr. Argento would like to see you upstairs in the green room. And we thought, this is like, you know, Peter Sellers, having just done his Così fan tutte set in a 1950s diner, is summoned upstairs by Mozart for a comment. So we trundled up nervously and we went in. And Dominic looked up at us and he said, I have learned more about myself from this production than anything else I have ever seen. So there I rest my case. That what should happen now, you know, I mean, in the world of theater, 95% of the work is terrible and 95% of the work you do is often terrible. So this doesn't happen all the time. But the idea that a director and a designer have the right to manipulate, to ignore, to reconfigure, to be a kind of analyst of the piece, because a lot of what you do is to literally analyze the piece, but you're analyzing the piece and sort of showing it. We sort of put the piece on a couch and we analyzed it and Dominic came and saw it and saw an analysis. Now, this gets extremely complicated because then there is where you go too far. The next production of The Ring at Bayreuth is being directed by Hans Castorp, who is a very well-known, very avant-garde, very daring German, mainly theater director. And he proposed to take The Ring, to rearrange it, and to intersperse it with other pieces of music, to essentially recreate The Ring in his image. And to me, unfortunately, that's not going to happen because it sounds completely fascinating, but that was just too much for Bayreuth. So again, there's always a balance as to what you can do, what you should do, what ethically you should do. But something also to remember that I think critics and so on often forget is that this is not the end all. This is not the last production. This is not, the music is not going to be, the score is going to exist on and on. People can do it over and over and over again. This has the sort of legal ramifications of it, and ethical and critical. Certainly you've probably read about the new production of Porgy and Bess, which was done at ART, the Gershwin, Porgy and Bess, which the Gershwin Family Institute allowed them to do. They have to get permission to do that. They rewrote it, they rewrote scenes, they reorchestrated it, they cut music, and there was a huge controversy led by Steve Sondheim, who used words like mutilate and corrupt and disfigure, that they were doing that to this piece. Again, just a question as to what you can do. Joanne Akalaitis did a production of Endgame, also at ART in Boston, in Cambridge, which was set not in the settings that Samuel Beckett had said, which was a room, throne in the center, 3 walls, a high window. They set it in a subway, in a deserted, rundown subway stop in New York. And Mr. Beckett said, "Any production of Endgame which ignores my stage directions is completely unacceptable to me. My play requires an empty room and 2 small windows. The American Repertory Theater production, which dismisses my directions, is a complete parody of the play as conceived by me. Anybody who cares for the work could not fail to be disgusted by this." And he was going to close it. He was going to withdraw the rights, and they would simply have to close, never open the performance. Something was negotiated, and it finally happened. But how, again, was he right to do that or wrong to do that? Where is the line? But I would like to quickly end by saying, the person who really owns the work of art is the viewer, is the audience member. Now, I say audience member, not the audience, because the work of art does not exist on the paper, it does not exist in the design, it does not exist in the direction, it does not exist in the performance, it does not exist in that total thing. It happens inside you. Inside, and to come back to the words that keep being used, it is created by your passion and by your creativity. You, individual members of any audience, are the center. You own the work of art.